I now have a way of selecting and deselecting seats to indicate provisional bookings. But before I attempt to write this to the database, I want to display any existing bookings on the form first, using little redheads. This means I need to write code to retrieve some of the data from the database first. Let's just remind ourselves what the database looks like. These are the existing bookings in a table called Table Bookings. All of this data was input manually. All I really need to know in order to update my form are these seat IDs. But I'm going to retrieve the whole table just in case I decide to do something with these customer IDs as well. Let's quickly add another booking manually for now. So Kevin Drum is booking seat 20. I want the existing bookings to be shown as soon as I open the form. So I'm going to write this code in the form's load event handler. I'll be sending an SQL command to the database, so I'll put it into a string variable. This will select all of the rows because I haven't used a where clause. Since I'm fetching all three columns from the table, I could have said select asterisk from table bookings. But I like to be explicit. It makes things easier to understand later on, so I'm going to go for the full field names. Notice I've also used capital letters for select and from. SQL isn't case sensitive at all, but again, I think it makes it easier to understand. The first bit of ADO.NET code I will write will establish a connection with the database. So I'm going to define the type of database and its location in a string variable. This is the connection string for an Access 2010 database. What a mouthful. The provider, Microsoft.ace.OleDB 12.0, is Access 2010. The rest of this is the path to my Access database file. The truth is, I can never remember exactly what to put in the connection string, so I've got it written down here. A quick internet search for VB.NET connection string Access 2010 got me what I need. The connection string will vary according to the type and location of your database. If you're using SQL Server, for example, you will have a different connection string. Now to establish the connection. So I need a variable of type OleDbConnection. I named it Con Bookings. It doesn't matter what it's called, but a naming convention makes the code easier to understand. Con Bookings because it's a connection to the bookings database. Ole stands for Object Linking and Embedding. DB is pretty obvious. Now I'll create a connection object from that class. In other words, create an instance of the connection class. I'll set its connection string property to specify the database to connect to. And finally, open the connection. So, by the time this code is executed, the program will have established a communication channel with the database. By the way, system.data.OleDB is the namespace in which the ADO.NET objects live. I can make my life a lot easier and import this at the top of the module. So from now on, I don't need to qualify all of my objects with this namespace. Okay, now I need a command object. First, declare a variable of type OleDbCommand. Then create an object from the class. Specify the SQL command that this command object will send to the database. And specify which connection this command object will use. By the way, I could have achieved the same effect as these 4 lines of code with just one line of code like this. This single line is absolutely fine in this scenario, but you might want to use the connection to fire different SQL commands at the database, or you might want to use the same command with multiple connections to different databases. Separating things out like this gives you that flexibility. By the way, that error is simply because I've declared it twice. Now I need a dataset to contain the data when it is fetched, and the data adapter with which to fill the dataset. And I'm telling the data adapter which command to use. Now I can call the data adapter's fill method and specify the dataset that I want to populate. My dataset will contain a table, which I can also give a name to now. I'm going to call this table Bookings. At this stage then, I have everything I need in a memory resident dataset, so I can disconnect from the database and do everything else offline, as it were. Let's tidy up a little bit. Now, before I go ahead and use the data that I've fetched to update the picture boxes on the form, I just want to prove that I have what I need. I can find out how many rows are in the data table like this. I'm asking for the count property of the rows collection within the table called Bookings within the dataset Bookings. So here's the moment of truth. Nine. There are 9 bookings in the table which I've fetched. That sounds about right. To be honest, this is a bit of a first for me. I was fully expecting this to crash, perhaps because I'd mistyped the connection string, or maybe I'd referred to a field which doesn't exist in my SQL statement. A runtime error would indicate which of these problems had occurred. Another test, I just want to make sure I can get a hold of a piece of data. I can reference a specific data item within a specific row like this. Same as before, but this time I'm looking for row 0, which is the first row in the data table that's been fetched, and item 1, which is the second column within that row. Remember, programmers count from 0. So let's see what this gets us. Those are my 9 rows. And that's got a customer ID in it. Okay, so far so good. What I really want to do is scan through the rows in that data table. Let's try that. I need an output string. I'm going to declare a variable to point to my data table. I'll call it T1. I need a row, or to be specific, a data row. And now a for each loop will let me visit each row in that table. And I'm going to build up my output string here. I'm referring to each field in the row using an index number. I could use the field names. And let's throw a new line on the end of that. Okay, so let's output the output string. A suspicious looking compilation error here. Looks okay now. Let's try that. Lovely. Okay, so I have the data. Now what I want to do is use these seat IDs to update my user interface. That's a fairly simple extra step now. First of all, I need a variable to point to my booked icon. So let's just duplicate some of this code here. Remember, I've already put this in my resources file. Now, inside my loop, I'm going to use row 2, which is the seat ID, the third column if you like, to update the appropriate picture box image, like this. Now look at this. I've built the name of the picture box by concatenating the seat number onto the string picture box. So if the row is for seat 21, this reads as picture box 21. Let's see what we get now. I'll just comment out the code I don't need. Fantastic. Those are my existing bookings. And of course, because they're red, I can't toggle them to green.